on their mic and tell me for sure that you can see that okay and it fills up the screen and looks good or whatever. And whether you can still see me or not, that might be up to you.
Yeah, I can see you.
That's great. You don't have to see me. You don't have to see me, but as long as you can see the problem and the potential solution, that's what's important. Okay, cool. So on the right here, we have the question. And so the company is making picture frames, and they're using a process costing system with one direct category, the direct materials, and then another category of input called conversion costs, which covers everything else in the manufacturing process. And materials are added at the 10% point. I'm not sure how they could start the process without the materials, but let's take them at their word. And we're off to the races. So what's the information that they give us? Well, we have a beginning work in process, which has 60 physical units in it, of which there's a certain amount of cost associated with materials and conversion. We're going to start 510 units. We've been able to complete 450, which means that there must be 120 left over in ending work in process. And we also know a little bit about money that was added this month. And they tell us the degree of completion in terms of product in our beginning and ending inventories. And that makes sense, that all of the materials are in because we're past the 10% point. So we would have added all of the materials. And as I mentioned last time, usually when we come to materials, they're either all in or all out. So when we're talking about materials, it's usually 100% or zero. You don't get the 40% or the 30% like you do for conversion costs, because basically that tells us whether or not we are further along in the process. So in terms of this little template, we want to keep track of the information that we have. So we have 60 physical units. Oops. How many did we start into production? 510, which means that we have 570 to account for, right? So that's pretty straightforward. So what happened to those 570? The weighted average approach doesn't separate the beginning work in process in terms of where they went. We need that for FIFO, but we do know that we completed 450. We'll talk about spoilage next week, so we'll just leave that blank. But we do know that ending work in process was 120, and sure enough, 450 plus 120 adds up to 570. So that's pretty good. So we've got a physical flow of units in, units out. So we've got 570 to account for, and we have accounted for them in the sense that we've either shipped them out or they're still here. And in this example, we don't have any spoiled or wasted units. Now, in terms of categories of inputs, we only have two categories: direct materials and conversion. So needless to say, we're not going to ship out anything unless it has all of the materials and all of the processing costs associated with it. Otherwise, they would not be ready to be shipped out. But the ending work in process, as it says over here, we've got 100% complete as far as materials is concerned, which means that that's the equivalent of all 120 units. But in terms of conversion, the ending work in process is 15% done, right? That's footnote B from here. So that's 15%. So what is 15% of 120? Let's see, 12 plus half of 12. So 12 plus 6 must be 18. At least that's the way I think of multiplying by 15%. You might just get out your calculator and do it. So in terms of the equivalent units of direct materials, how much was used this month? Looks like 570. But in terms of the conversion costs, because the ending work in process was only 15% complete, it means that we didn't do 120 units worth of work on them yet. We only did 18 units worth of work on them, plus the 450 that we shipped out. So I guess that adds up to what, 468? So like I say, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, okay? Because like I say, I can't see the chat room, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And this one, I should have put this in. Oops. I am a really terrible typist. So this part up here is all based on units, right? Now we want to look at basically the same information, or to a certain extent, in terms of dollars. Okay, so because we want to figure out a cost per unit. So what's my beginning work in process? The value of it, they tell us that over here. 1530. I guess I probably should put in a dollar sign just so people know that this is money we're talking about. And 156. So what's that total? 1,000. 686. And how much did I add this period? Well, they tell us that over here. 17,850. And what is it, 11,544? Add them up, and what do we get? 28, 29, something?
29,390.
29,394, is that right?
Yeah.
Sounds good, thanks. So in total, what do I have to account for then? I've got a little over $31,000. 080. So I basically have this $31,080 that I have to figure out where does it go. And of that $31,080, I've got what, 19,380 in terms of materials, and 11,700, I guess, in terms of conversion costs. So what's my cost per unit? Well, basically, I've got my total cost of materials. I've got my total equivalent number of units for materials. So 19,380 divided by 570, or line B divided by line A. And I think it works out to about $34 even, right? Nice textbook example. And 11,700 divided by 468 gives me $25. Now, key thing to notice, I'm going to add these across and get $59, right? Oops. Interesting. Wonder why that didn't come out in the middle. But one thing you got to notice is that if I did the total cost and divided by 570, I would not get $59. And that's why it's really important not to do that, because that would be wrong. And why is it wrong? It would be wrong because this total dollars that we've spent does not represent 570 fully completed units. It represents, the cost of materials divided by 570 fully completed units. But in terms of the conversion costs, they only represent 468 equivalent fully completed units. And so that's why we really have to separate the two different types of inputs. And that's why it's so important that we keep track of the inputs separately, in this case, materials and conversion. So the total cost of making one fully complete good unit is the sum of this plus this. It is not the total cost for the month divided by the total number of units that we touched, because that 570 we did not fully complete. So it wouldn't be a good comparator. Okay, now the thing is, this is all preamble. I've got my product, what happened to it, and I figured out my cost per unit. So now I'm going to use that information to provide good, useful information to our managers and for our accountants. So what's the cost of good units completed? Well, I know I completed 450 units. Each unit is worth $59 each. So 450 times 59 would give me 26,550. Now, you might ask, how come I couldn't divide this number by 570 to get this, but I can multiply 450 times this to get this? Well, that's because I got 450 here and 450 here. And so I took a bit of a shortcut because I've got 450 all the way across. But a better approach would be to say, okay, what's the materials part? 450 times 34. 450 times 34 is 15,300. And what's 450 times 25? is 11,250 and then add across. And that would be the right way to do it. And that's certainly the way we're going to value our ending inventory, because you'll notice that ending inventory does not have the same number of equivalent units for each of the different components. So we have to do them separately. So we don't have any spoilage to deal with, so that's good. What's the value of my ending work in process then? Well, I've got 120 equivalent units of materials. Actually, maybe. Yeah, just so I can get the whole thing in there and keep it at a decent size. So what's for direct materials? I've got 120 equivalent units at $34 each. So 120 times 34, 4,080. Oops. My ending work in process only has the equivalent of 18 units worth of conversion cost though, but at $25 each, I've spent about the equivalent of $450 in terms of the effort on that batch. So 450 plus 4,080, I guess gives me what, about 4,530. And if I typed in properly, it would have been better. 4,580 or 30. And just to check, does this plus this add up to 31,080? And indeed it does. So I did it right. So the whole idea of this kind of a report is to show the physical units in, the physical units out. Step one. Using the separate categories of inputs and the concept of equivalent units, I can calculate my cost per unit for each of those different types of inputs. And then I can use that information to determine what's the value of the goods transferred out and the value of my ending work in process. All of this so that in my journal entry, I would say, you know, what are my costs in to my work in process account, right? My work in process account started with $1,686 in, right? They tell us that. I added to work in process, I debited work in process 17,850 for direct materials. I debited to work in process 11,544 for all of the labor and the overhead costs. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to credit work in process for 26,550 to show the transfer from work in process to finished goods. And so I start with this. I added this, which was made up of these two entries. So this is what I added to work in process. I take this much out of work in process by crediting the account. And this will be my ending balance, which will become the beginning work in process for next period. So this way I can keep track of the value of my product, both the in-process amount as well as the finished amount, so that when it is sold, I can determine cost of goods sold for the income statement. What do you think? Questions, comments? I've put on Brightspace suggested solutions to several problems, including problem 31, which is doing this exact problem all over again, except using the FIFO approach instead of the weighted average approach. So check that out, work on that on your own, because you should be familiar with both approaches. Now, what I want to do, though, instead is this problem 40.